Hello and welcome to my channel. The subject of this video is a basic study of Lord Indra in the Vedas, Part 1. Introduction. Quote, I think of Indra only, forever, fiend slayer. May these louds of mine come near him. He cometh to the pious offerers calling. May he deliver us from grief and trouble. Who, with strong arms o'ercomes his enemies, who broke and crushed the power of the asuras, who won the rivers and the kine in battle. May he deliver us from grief and trouble. Unquote. Who is Lord Indra? Lord Indra would be described in mythological terms as the head of the Vedic Aryan pantheon. He is the firstborn of the Adityas. In Vedic literature, the Adityas are the apex of the celestial hierarchy responsible for management of the multiverse in all its permutations. Within the text of the Vedas Samhitas themselves, he was the deva most commonly petitioned and worshipped as the Supreme Lord. However, after the Vedic era, 1500 BC to 600 BC as it is academically dated, while he maintains the same offices that he has traditionally, he has become more retired in his roles and relationship to the human community with the shifting of the ages. Although, in this age of rising barbarism such as the ancient seers faced with lawless and inhumane cults such as those of the nomadic dasyus, perhaps he will make a return. This transition can be seen in the literature of the Puranas, which academically dated are 300 BC to 300 AD. One of the most prominent examples is the tale of the young Lord Krishna sheltering the villagers of Braj under Mount Govardhan from the thunderstorm sent by Lord Indra when they neglected his festival to honor the 8th avatar of Lord Vishnu. This could be seen as indicative of a shift from the worship of Lord Indra to that of Lord Vishnu. Methodology. The methodology I will be using to analyze this subject in the Vedas is called triplification. When one takes a term in the Vedas, such as Agni, for example, and studies the mantras consistently, one finds that the term is used generally in 3 different ways which are determined by context. Thus, there is the celestial Agni, who is the Deva Lord Agni, and the terrestrial Agni, who is fire and most often the fire of the sacrifices. Then there is Agni in the microcosm, which is the prana within man. In the case of Lord Indra, there is the celestial king of the Devas, Lord Indra, the terrestrial Indra, which is the visible sky that dominates our perceptual view of the world, and finally the yogic Indra, which is the empirical and biographical ego, which seems to rule our inner landscape as the sky does the outer. Before proceeding, I wish to point out, as always, that my research is my own and reflects my views as they stand at present. I do not regard this as engraved in stone. I will post as many of my sources as I am able for both review and comment. Also, this study should be considered basic and is not exhaustive. One last note, because there is such a tremendous amount of basic information about Lord Indra in the Vedas, I'm forced to divide this study into 2 parts to sufficiently publish a study of this data. Part 1 will focus exclusively on the celestial Lord Indra. In Part 2, I will explore the terrestrial and yogic Indras, as well as the Western Aryan parallels. So this is going to be a long one, so if you need to grab your coffee, then pause the video now to do it. The celestial Lord Indra. Genealogy. In the Vedas, Lord Indra's mother was the goddess Aditi, who is often described as a primeval goddess. He was the firstborn of her offspring, who would be known as the Adityas. The legend is that he was born in a cave and was carried for an unusually long term by the goddess. The seers record that he was born for slaying enemies. He perceived the Soma, we are told, on his mother's breast at birth, and imbibing this, sought immediately for combat. Quote, "On the day you were born, you did drink at will the mountain-abiding nectar of this Soma plant, for your youthful parent mother, Aditi. In the dwelling of your great sire, gave it to you before she gave you the breast. Approaching his mother, he asked for food, and beheld the acrid Soma upon her bosom. Eager he proceeds, dislodging the adversaries of the Devas, and putting forth manifold energy, he performs wild deeds." Unquote. The subject of his paternity is mentioned in only one verse directly in the Rig Veda, when his father is said to be dasyus. He is a very minimal and distant presence in the Vedas compared to the goddess Aditi. Quote, "Heaven, or dasyus, your progenitor, conceived a worthy son. The maker of Indra was the accomplisher of a most excellent work. He who begat the adorable Indra with the thunderbolt, irremovable from his station and endowed with greatness." Unquote. There is one verse, however, where Lord Indra himself seems to bear this name. He firmly planted the plains and mountains. Dasyus thundered forth and made the air's mid-region quake. His consort in the Vedas is the goddess Indrani. Appearance. General. Lord Indra appeared to the seers and Brahmins on the kusa grass and the hides upon which the Soma was sprinkled in the Vedic rites. They recorded in the hymns a variety of details about how he was perceived by them. One of the most repeated adjectives used to describe him is opulent and richly decorated. The later Vedas mention he wears gold ornaments. The Adityas in general are described in an aristocratic manner, as is consistent with their roles within the culture of the land of the seven rivers. As their chief or king, one would expect that Lord Indra would visually communicate with this opulence his higher status. The Adityas are also commonly portrayed as brilliant or luminous, and this too is a trait which the sages mention when referring to Lord Indra's appearance as well. As their leader, of course, he possesses this trait in greater abundance than the other devas. He is called seven-rayed and radiant, likened to the sun. In addition to the solar motif, his illumination is said to be like that of a forest fire. Moving to more detailed descriptions, the seers tell us that he is ever young. This is somewhat surprising, as generally his Western Aryan parallels in Zeus and Jupiter, and to a lesser degree Odin, are portrayed as men in their 50s. But while youthful, He is clearly not boyish, as he is described as having a golden beard. In another verse, he is described as having yellow hair and beard, which implies a lighter tone. But this is in conjunction in this hymn with the description of the Soma plant and creating a parallel between them, so it may not be exactly how he was perceived by the sages. He is frequently described as handsome in general or of pleasing appearance. The hymns give a further sketch of his appearance. Quote, long-necked, large-bellied, strong-armed Indra, in the exhilaration of the sacrificial food, destroys his enemies. Unquote. This motif of a large belly is repeated elsewhere, generally in relationship to his appetite for the Soma brew, where it swells like the ocean. The seers tell us he is handsome-chinned, as well as azure-chinned. This is echoed in another verse where he is described as blue-colored. In other places, the sages tell us Indra's form is yellow. In some translations, such as those of Griffiths, there are mantras which refer to his complexion as green. Speaking of green, the sages of the Atharva Veda tell us Lord Indra has green eyes. There are depictions of him in later Hindu iconography as both blue and green. At other places in the Rig Veda, he is called golden, and in the Sama Veda, he is referred to as fair-cheeked, which implies a lighter complexion. Forms and epitaphs of Lord Indra. Quote, Indra, hero assuming many forms, may that truthfulness of yours protect us. Bear us, thunderer, over our many sins as over waters, where, radiant Indra, wilt you give us some wealth, desirable to all, manifold in its kinds. Unquote. These conflicting descriptions should not be understood as contradictory. It is common already in the Rig Veda and all the way through to modern Hinduism for the devas to assume a variety of forms based upon their sundry activities. Thus, the colors, weapons, and details of his arms would vary according to the form with which he is manifest. Lord Indra is described as possessing 4 asura-destroying forms, which reflect his wrathful aspect, and it seems one of these had 99 arms, with which he hurled Arbudasura down a mountain and into a lake. The sages honor all forms of Indra, and also mention a secret form. There is also a rather cryptic reference to a sacrificial 4th name. Some of these forms he assumed are those of animals or possibly therianthropes. In one hymn, he is mentioned as having the form of a ram, but by far the animal and animal form most associated with him, while some are clearly poetic only, is that of the bull. He is characterized in the Atharva Veda as the bull of earth. He is described as a sharp-horned bull among the herds, and a bull with 1,000 horns. Another form of Lord Indra is his identification with the sun under the name Sura. Gandharva is a name for both the sun and Lord Indra. In one mantra, interestingly, Savita is an epitaph for Lord Indra, while in others he is said to give excellent light to men. In the Atharva Veda, he is described as appearing in the garb of the sun. This is quite common in the Vedas, as a number of devas are identified with the sun. the seers mention directly that the sun is Indra, Mitra, and Varuna. There are other names representing various forms of Lord Indra mentioned commonly in the Vedas. Several of these are Maghavan. The meaning of this word is munificent or bountiful. This applies to the boon-bestowing aspect of Lord Indra. Shatakratu. One use of this name is a term for the performance of 100 horse sacrifices, which entitles one to a place akin to that of Lord Indra, some sources say. This would refer to Lord Indra as the Lord of Sacrifices, or possibly under the form representing the vitality of the horse. Chakra. The meaning of this epitaph is powerful one, and expresses a form of Lord Indra as protector, as is used often in the mantras. In this specific form, his weapon is a net, described in the Atharva Veda as air was the net and poles the sky. This form of Lord Indra became manifest in Japan via Buddhism as Taishakuten, Lord of the Center and also commander of the 4 heavenly kings in Shinto. Alaya is a wrathful form of Lord Indra, exhilarated by Soma and armed with the battle axe. It should be noted that this fluidity of form, a standard trait of all of the devas, clearly argues against them being understood or reducible to material entities. In the ancient alien thesis, for example, the gods were merely physical beings like men, but possessed of better gadgets, which the foolish primitive people mistook for magic. But in the case of the records of the subcontinent regarding the devas, they are specifically not material, but energetic beings. Weapons. Always a fun subject for me. The primary weapon of Lord Indra is, of course, the thunderbolt. The seers often hail him in the hymns as the wielder of the thunderbolt. The most common origin of this weapon is that it was made for Lord Indra by the great architect of the universe, the manifestation of Lord Brahma in the Rig Veda, which is Lord Vishwakarma, called Tvasta. There is an alternative version given in a later mandala of the Rig Veda, in which this weapon was a thought form made for Lord Indra by the seer Usanas. In the hymns, there are a variety of details about the appearance of this weapon. We are told that it is many-bladed or 100-edged. Further, it is an all-pervading golden thunderbolt. Pardon me. Which is great as the sun in heaven. The material of which it was fashioned by Lord Vishwakarma was iron, which should be understood more generically as forged metal at this point, since this is before the Iron Age. Another verse is more specific when it says that the bolt is yellow, made of iron. The probability here is that this yellow represents illumination arising from the object rather than, say, paint. One example of the effect and potency of this weapon is that it is said to have carved out a river channel in one of Lord Indra's battles. While it is not stated as such, given that one of Lord Indra's epitaphs is destroyer of cities, there's no doubt that this weapon played a role in such destructions. It is the common assumption, based upon the view that Lord Indra is reducible to a mere weather god, that this thunderbolt is identical with the lightning we see in thunderstorms. As we shall see in part 2, in speaking about the terrestrial Indra as the visible sky, this is a somewhat justified reading, although it needs some detail. However, it is not consistent with all the mantras in the Vedas on this subject. The primary weapon of the celestial Lord Indra is not the lightning, because it is a self-contained, fabricated artifact, and it is able to deliver more destructive power than a mere lightning strike. It is called a thunderbolt by the seers of the Vedas, as this was the only reference point that they had to describe the object, whatever it may be in itself. In the Vedas, the lightning that flashes across the sky is a form of Lord Agni. Lord Indra's bolt, however, is identified with Lord Manu, who is a manifestation of the divine force of anger. While Lord Indra is generally not portrayed in the Vedas wielding a bow or a spear, although at birth he appears to grasp an arrow, he is said to possess other weapons. In one verse it is said, Indra by devices humbles deceivers. The devices he uses to fight these asuras are not identified in the Rig Veda. However, one is mentioned in the Atharva Veda, the Trisandi. Quote, let Indra Vritra Slayer with smite with Trisandi as a bolt. The effects of this weapon, as described in the hymn, are encompassing gloom and flesh-eating. As seen from one of his epitaphs, there is also a form armed with a battle axe. In the later mandalas of the Rig Veda is reference to a lance-like long hook. In another mantra, he is said to be the wearer of the helmet, Sushipra. In the Atharva Veda, a net is mentioned used in battle, which, bound with the mighty net, he let them break quickly. Chariot and horses. One of the most common attributes of all the devas in the Vedas is that they ride in chariots. Of course, the big exception to that being Lord Rudra. This is a highly aristocratic trait, displaying the high status of the devas in general and the Adityas in particular. Lord Indra obviously is associated with the chariot. There are some details given about this artifact, recording that it is strong-wheeled and gold-seated. It is also said that his chariot showers blessing. In general, the chariots of the devas are golden in radiance, so it would be proper to assume that the same could be said of Lord Indra's chariot. In one verse, this is described as radiant. In fact, his charioteer is named Kutsa. He was an asura who was taken from Shusnasura. In some verses, Lord Agni is said to be with him in his car. The seers focused more on the well-yoked, prancing steeds of Lord Indra than his chariot. The king of devas is the lord of horses. They tell us that his steeds fill the heavens. They are also described as glossy backed, which implies there is a radiant sheen to them. They are in fact called bright. His steeds are young and vigorous as well as fast. These long-maned steeds are often called tawny, as well as brown. In other verses, they are said to be red and black. Another feature of these luminous steeds is that their manes and tails are compared to the feathers of the peacock. The sages of the Atharva Vedas say that his horses are green. Generally, there are two horses. However, in other verses, different counts are given. Pardon me. Quote, "Come to our presence, Indra, having harnessed your car with 2 horses, or with 4, or with 6, or with 8, or with 10, to drink Soma juice. Come to our presence, Indra, harnessing your car with 20 or 40 or 50 well-trained steeds, or with 60 or 70, unquote. These variations on the color and numbers of these steeds may well represent the various forms of Lord Indra. In the Atharva Veda is a rather cryptic statement regarding these steeds. Quote, "Lord Indra has horses known as Hari, who defeat the enemies and nourish the gentlemen," unquote. Later in this same book, which is Kanda 20, it is made clear that Hari is not a general description for all the horses, as it is written 2 Haris. In other words, each horse is Hari. Generically, Hari is a color reference which could be translated as a variety of tones of yellow, brown, or green, depending on who you talk to. Color is an adjective, not a noun. If not, why would the horses be known as yellow or 2 yellows? It is unclear to me from the text of the Samhitas alone exactly what this may mean. These colors are associated with the Soma, so they may be identifying here the horses as forms of the Soma. Activities of the celestial Lord Indra. Quote, "Friends, when the libations are effused, do you satisfy that liberal Indra with the Soma juices? Let there be plenty for him, that he may provide for our nourishment. Indra never neglects the care of him who presents copious libations," unquote. Lord Indra fulfills a variety of roles in the Vedas. He was the deva who was most petitioned by the seers and people of the Vedic era for a variety of needs, both temporal and spiritual. The sages portray Lord Indra as very engaged with his devotees, and of him they say, Indra knows the needs of his worshippers. Lord Indra as warrior. The dominant activity of Lord Indra in the Vedic hymns is that he is the Lord of battle and the author of war, to whom the sages give the epitaphs of the dancer in battle and the giver of victory. There is no deva as associated with conflict, and it was he most often whom the Aryan warriors called upon to defeat foes and powerful enemies, as he is said to be found where bright spears play. In the Samaveda, it is advised to call upon Indra even in a small fight, as even in such struggles he is the giver of room, to grant tactical aid in combat, as one always wants to be in control of the space where personal combat occurs. This is called the Ma in Japanese martial arts. Protection. Quote, "May Indra aid us when our flags are gathered. Victorious be the arrows of our army. May our brave men of war prevail in battle." Unquote. Lord Indra's chief role as a warrior is protection. Specifically, he protects the Arya tribes from workers of evil. These are the 5 kindred sacrificing tribes who followed the Vedic path. The main tribes of the Rig Veda were the Turvasus, the Yadus, the Anu, the Dasyus, and the Purus, although they did not always live in harmony and brotherly love with each other. Of these, the Purus would become the strongest presence in the subcontinent, and the Anus and the Dasyus migrated to the west, as is mentioned by Dr. Talagiri. In his warrior aspect, one of the most common epitaphs of Indra is hero, and the chief of heroes. In the Atharva Veda, the poet prays for security from the Lord of Fleet Horses, saying, quote, "Grant us protection, Indra, with that body of thine that is on earth, in fire and in water, that dwells within light, finding Pavamana, wherewith thou hast pervaded air's mid-region." Unquote. Asuras. Many of Lord Indra's battles with the etheric asuras are, of course, legendary. Indra alone, we are told, can cast down the Vritras. His most famous battle in the Rig Veda was with Vritrasura, in which he defeated the asura and killed his mother, the goddess Danu. Quote, "With his vast destroying thunderbolt, Indra struck the darkling and mutilated Vritra. As the trunks of trees are felled by the axe, so lies Ahi prostrate on the earth. The mother of Vritra was bending over her son when Indra struck her nether part with his shaft. So the mother was above and the son underneath, and Danu slept with her son like a cow with its calf." Unquote. His second most famous exploit was that as the hero who liberated the cows of Lord Brihaspati, as they're often portrayed, that had been concealed by Balasura. This legend of the rescue of the cattle in various versions is the dominant myth of the Rig Veda. Additionally, he defeated a number of other powerful asuras. He killed and flayed Krishnasura, he crushed the head of Namuchi, and he hurled Arbudashsura into a lake. Rakshasas. Though not as frequently as the etheric asuras, Lord Indra is also called upon to combat the etheric Rakshasas and related forces with fiery, searching, adamantine weapons, so they depart without a sound. Quote, "Indra and Soma, afflict, destroy the Rakshasas. Shower of benefits, cast down those who delight in darkness. Put to flight the stupid spirits. Consume, slay, drive away, utterly exterminate the cannibals." Unquote. There is a blending of imagery in this hymn between the etheric and the human Rakshasas, referring to the cannibalistic practices of the nomadic dasyus and the etheric species as shapeshifters. Beyond this hymn, the petition to destroy the Rakshasas is found elsewhere in the Rig Veda, along with the petition to fight Rakshasas. The dasyus, quote, "He who with the thunderbolt has destroyed many committing great sin and offering him no homage, who grants not success to the confident, who is the slayer of dasyus, he men is Indra." Unquote. Lord Indra was called upon to combat not only the etheric species of the asuras and various Rakshasas, but for aid against the mortal enemies of the Aryan tribes, the nomadic dasyus. He is the slayer of dasyus. To the seers of the Vedas, the primary distinction with these peoples is found in the nature of their cults, which were regarded as lawless and inhumane due to their cannibalistic practices. They praise Lord Indra for prevailing over the godless and scattering the black host. He is additionally hailed as the afflictor of heathens. This extends even further than the nomadic dasyus, as Lord Indra is called upon in general to destroy those who were opposed to the values and traditions of the Aryan tribes reflected in the Aryan law. Quote, "Pluck the Rakshasas, Indra, by the root, cut as under the middle, blight the summit, to whatever remote region you have driven sinners. Cast upon the enemy of the Veda your consuming weapons." Unquote. An important question could be asked at this point. How did Lord Indra battle these terrorists of the ancient world? In Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, the Achaean gods fought directly, at times visibly, on the battlefields for their respective sides of the Trojan War in the poem. This is because to the archaic Greeks, the deities were fully material beings but simply endowed with superhuman abilities. They were mortal because they drank ambrosia. This is why, for example, in Book 5 of the Iliad, brawny Diomedes was able to actually cut the goddess Aphrodite with a bronze spear. She bled a clear liquid because she eats not the grains of earth, as Homer says, but only ambrosia. To the seers of the Vedas, the Devas, the divine race, were not material beings, but what we might call plasma, as they are composed of a form of Agni. Thus, did Lord Indra materialize in some form on the battlefield? There may have been some such instances, but it does not seem that this was the norm. Lord Indra acted in battle by imputing his energy to the warriors. This is referenced explicitly in a number of hymns scattered through the Vedas. In the tribal era of the Rig Veda, the sages beseeched Lord Indra, "Impart to us energy to overcome foes," and they advised the warriors to invoke Indra in battle for action to lead to victory. In the Yajurveda, the sages pray for the warriors so they would be given the form and vital power of Indra. and they asked of him directly, Indra, bestow on me the Indra power. Thus, generally, it appears Lord Indra was active on the battlefield with the Aryan warriors, acting as energetic conduits of his energy in at least some instances. Bhagavan, the Lord of wealth and the giver of boons. Quote, gratify our desire for wealth with cows, with horses, with shining treasures, and make us renowned. The wise Kusikas, desirous of heaven, offer praise to you, Indra. Unquote. More than any other of the devas of the Vedas, Lord Indra is the lord of wealth and material prosperity. The sages praise him highly for the grant of the boon of prosperity. He is portrayed as a mine of wealth and an ocean of wealth who liberally bestows boons upon his devotees as reflected in his form of Bhagavan. Not only does he liberally give to his devotees, but he actively challenges man to ask wealth of him, because he gives as much wealth as a man wants. Quote, press the Soma, ask riches of me alone, ye Purus, in my friendship shall not suffer harm. Unquote. So generous is Lord Indra that he gives wealth to the undevout who honor him. He is said to grant more than simple well-being, but to give enviable opulence and unequal abundance. There are numerous examples of this found in the Rig Veda, where the seers praise Lord Indra for astonishing gifts which were ultimately generated by their rituals. To take one example of many, quote, these princes have given to the Saman, the chanter, Pajra, 3,000 horses, 10,000 cattle, unquote. It should be emphasized that in the era of the Rig Veda, poverty was not an idealized state to be courted. Rather, it was a state which the sages prayed and sacrificed would be dispelled. The sages sought abundance and boundless wealth for their families and for their patrons. Anxiety over the basic necessities of life is not conducive to one of the other boons these seers actively sought from Lord Indra as well as other devas: happiness. Pardon me. Quote, grant us that happiness of yours, as birds spread their wings. O you possessed of all wealth, we solicit riches suitable for our dwelling. Your aids are void of harm. Your aids are true aids. May our sins avoid us as charioteers inaccessible places. May we abide in Indra's happiness and in the protection of the Adityas. Unquote. This value of happiness is, so far as I am aware, absent in many later Sanskrit works, but was often sought after by the Vedic sages. Lord Indra is not only the giver of happiness, but along these same lines is called the granter of wishes as well. But this pursuit of happiness was not a justification for a libertine lifestyle or a crass materialism. This must be placed in context as the boons of Lord Indra that the sages sought were both temporal and spiritual. In other words, there has to be a balance. And also, this form of happiness has to be, as they say, related to our condition. Cattle. The nature of the boons sought after by the seers is indicative of the values of the Vedic material culture in the ancient subcontinent. By far, the greatest percentage of these requests are for herds of cattle. The sages advise one to worship Indra to gain herds of cattle. Quote, Indra, invested with all energies, has filled both heaven and earth. Collect cattle and bestow them abundantly upon us. Unquote. Bhagavan is called the Lord of Cattle, who bestows gifts of cattle, and even cattle adorned with gold. It was he who can make a man possessed of cattle, as Lord Indra's wealth is kind. There are numerous historical examples in the Rig Veda where the seers praise Lord Indra for the gifts of cattle. He gives the cows of the dasyus taken in raids, as well as kine from conflicts between the Aryan tribes. For example, the goods of Anu's son, Indra, gave to Tristus. They also record specific instances of such boons, noting 60,000 head of cattle, in another 1,000 cows, and in another instance 100 bulls. Horses. Quote, we solicit Indra for 1,000 well-trained swift-going horses for 100 jars of Soma. Unquote. The second most commonly requested material item by the seers, most probably for their patrons, was horses. As in many other cultures, the horse was a high-status item in the ancient subcontinent. Its value in the Vedic religion can be seen from the fact that it is only sacrificed, unlike other domestic animals, in the rite of the horse sacrifice. This is the pinnacle of the Vedic system, and the patronage of this rite is restricted to the highest political figure of the land. In the Vedic era, this would be a powerful chief or king. The Asur-Chind king of Devas is called by the sages the Lord of Horses. The horse is said to be under his control, and he bestows these animals upon his devotees to make them rich in horses. As with cattle, the sages record specific instances of horses which manifest in their lives from the energy of Lord Indra. In one instance, the sages give thanks to Lord Indra for the gift of 2 horses from a prince, while in other verses they seek a significantly great number. As quoted, we ask for 1,000 swift horses. Quote, the sage Avasyu has obtained docile horses, endowed with the speed of the wind. All your adorers, Indra, in this world, your friends, augment your vigor by their praises. Unquote. Sustenance. Lord Indra, like many other devas, was also invoked to provide basic sustenance or food for the seers, their clans, and patrons. Lord Indra is called the Lord of Food, and the sages sought of him ample food, of which he was the distributor. He is also praised as giving 1,000 kinds of food. Among them, he is called the giver of barley. Sons. Another common request by the seers was for numerous sons, or sometimes grandsons. Quote, O Magavan, to opulence, who adore the powerful one at the sacrifice for the sake of obtaining a son, a grandson, the fulfillment of their desires and honorable wealth. Unquote. The type of sons they sought reflect the classical Aryan virtues which the sages call ideal. The sages of the Atharva Veda mention chivalrous children. Quote, Shower of benefits, Indra, grant us a son who shall be most vigorous, a delighter of you by praise, a pious sacrificer, a liberal giver, who mounted on a good steed shall overthrow and conquer opposing enemies in combat. Unquote. We can see from this example that the sons they sought were what the Edo-Japanese would call the unification of the pen and the sword. They were intelligent, devout, and generous with their families and clans, but applied their intelligence and strength to fight against the forces of terrorism with ferocity to defend their way of life. This is the Aryan ideal. Other temporal boons. There are a variety of other material gifts that the seers sought from Lord Indra. Were the now defunct Aryan invasion theory correct, then one would expect to find more frequent requests for territories and cities. This is, after all, what a conquering people would pray for. But this is not the case. There are only infrequent prayers for land and none directly for cities, although there were conflicts with them. Among the other matters for which they sacrificed were for wives and chariots. Surprisingly, there are not the frequent petitions for gold that one might expect, although there are a number of recorded incidents in which the sages were given gold. Quote, to complete an earlier verse quoted above, quote, these princes have given to the Saman, the chanter Pajra, 300 horses, 10,000 cattle. The exalted prince has been raised by fame to heaven, for he has given camels laden with 4 bags of gold and Yadva people as slaves. Unquote. Other historical examples of the types of gifts recorded by the seers are 100 dressed hides, 100 oxen, and 100 dogs. That would be pretty nice, as well as gold vessels and oil. Ear ornaments are also mentioned in one verse. But I'll just drop in here that one thing that is not mentioned are any specific products or artifacts which are associated with the Indus Valley civilization. Heaven. Quote, Indra, the deva who finds heaven light on paths most rich in pleasant voices. Unquote. It has been mentioned that the seers sought from Lord Indra both temporal and celestial boons. Among the spiritual gifts that they sought from him is entry to heaven, as Lord Indra is honored as Lord of Heaven. Heaven is presented in the Vedas as an ethereal region and the abode of Lord Indra. This is also called Svarga, and Lord Indra is described as the giver of Svarga. The sages say, Indra takes us to heaven and bliss. As his abode in the firmament, this region is described by the sages as opulent. He is also said to visit worshippers from his ancient dwelling. One aspect of his activities in respect to the state of the devotee is the afterlife, where Lord Indra is the Lord of the good and is also portrayed as a judge of souls who rightly judges men for their deeds. In the later literature of the Puranas, this would be the role of Lord Yama based on the accounting of his assistant, Lord Chitragupta, who I mention because Chitra Purnima is in just a couple days. And yes, I am patron of a fire ritual to Lord Chitragupta. He, Indra that is said to forgive sin and to remove all sin from men. On the other side of the moral spectrum, we are told that Lord Indra excludes the wicked from heaven, and the sages pray, "Slay us not for our sins." These notions of sin and wickedness lead to another activity of Lord Indra, though less forward in many of the hymns, the lawgiver. Generally, this association with morality is more the sphere of Lord Varuna. Pardon me. In several places, there are references which mention that Lord Indra gives laws to men. This is never explicitly defined in the hymns of the Vedas as one finds list of injunctions and prohibitions in the biblical book of Deuteronomy, for example. However, the essence of this law is communicated to man in the statement, Indra and Vishnu made the world for sacrifice. So that means that this is all about relationships and giving and harmony. The Supreme Lord. In the Veda Samhitas, the office of Supreme Lord is attributed to a variety of devas. The reason for this is that the sages appear to wish to have emphasized a personal path for the approach to the divine. In that era, the deva who was most frequently worshipped under this auspice, with roughly 45% of the relative mantras, was Lord Indra, King of Devas. Quote, "You, Indra, are king. They who are devas are subject to you. Therefore, scatterer of foes, do you protect and cherish us men. You are the protector of the good, the possessor of wealth, the extractor of us from sin. You are true, the investor of all with your luster, the giver of strength." Unquote. Alaya is frequently hailed by the seers as the King of Devas. He is also declared to be supreme and the best of beings. The later sages of the Samaveda refer to him as the master of all beings, and in the Atharva Veda he is called the administrator of the world, although administrator does have a slightly different nuance to it. All devas give precedence to Indra, as he is the undisputed sovereign whom none surpass. For this reason, the devas all seek his friendship, and to honor him, even Lord Vishnu offers to Lord Indra his own portion of the Soma brew. Not only is he the king of devas, but of mankind as well. He also bears the title of Lord of all creatures and King of all living organisms in the heaven and also on earth. Omnipotence. The trait of omnipotence is attributed to Lord Indra. The sages tell us he is invincible. The author of war is the Lord of strength, and no deva is stronger than Indra. In the hymns of the Samaveda, he is hailed as the Lord of power and might. His power is such that he can fold up heaven and earth like a skin. Because of this, when angered, all devas are afraid. Omniscience and omnipresence. Quote, Indra cannot be brought low, he cannot be overpowered. He hears, he sees all. Unquote. Lord Indra is called the most sapient one, and the seers sing in the hymns that there is none more wise than Indra, and all the devas honor him as such. He knows all things, including all births. He is also said to possess supreme knowledge. Another trait of Shatakratu is that he is omnipresent. The sages teach, quote, he filled heaven and earth with his ethereal form as well as the midheaven. He contemplates in various aspects the 5 orders of being, the classes of 7 in their seasons, and the 34 devas, endowed with light of like nature and with various functions. Unquote. All of these attributes are consistent with the definition of a supreme being, but Lord Indra is not restricted to them and meets other qualifications as the preserver of the natural and social order. Even in the era of the Vedas, this role was frequently assigned to Lord Vishnu, although there are mantras where at least some aspects of this duty fall upon the king of devas. Creator. Quote, firm-minded Indra, abiding secure in your strength beyond the limit of the wide expanding firmament, you have framed the earth for our preservation. You have encompassed the firmament and the sky as far as to the heavens. Unquote. Lord Indra is also attributed with the role of the artifactor of creation in many hymns, who specifically made all things that exist. Those sages who worshipped him as the Supreme Lord sing his praises, claiming, Indra fixed the earth and spread the sky, and fixed the constellations. In one verse, he is said to have made the planets. As creator, one sage describes Indra as our father and our mother. The sages inform us that this was done quickly with his energy. In the Yajurveda, there may be an insight into this creative energy, as the seers say that Saraswati with speech, or Vak, gives might and power to Indra. Speech, or Vak, in the Vedas represents the primal energy from which all is manifest. This is identified with the goddess who is called the sovereign queen in the Rig Veda. A synonym for this in the Vedas is Viraj. There is a mantra which relates Viraj with Lord Indra. Quote, "The bright Viraj grew potent Indra's self." Unquote. In other mantras of the Vedas, chakra acts in conjunction with other devas in the activity of creation. In one example, the primary forces active in the manifestation of the multiverse are Lord Indra and Lord Varuna. Quote, "Indra and Varuna, inasmuch as you have created by your might all the beings of the world, therefore Mitra worships Varuna for prosperity." Unquote. In other verses, we find that the companion creator, not surprisingly, is Lord Vishnu. Quote, "You two, Indra and Vishnu, have made the spacious world for the sake of sacrifice, generating the sun and the dawn and Agni." Unquote. The later sages of the Atharva Veda pair Lord Indra with Lord Brihaspati. There is some dispute, it should be noted, whether this deva is identical with Jupiter, who is known as Guru, and Lord Brihaspati in the Puranas. It is the opinion of Aurobindo in Secret of the Vedas that they are distinct. Other people, however, seem to think that they are not. Quote, "As a black horse is decorated with the gold ornaments, the lords Indra and Brihaspati have decorated the world of the sun with the twinkling stars. They placed the darkness in the night and the light in the day." Unquote. Beyond the role of creator, there are some seers who identify the entirety of creation as a form of Lord Indra himself. Quote, "Lord Indra is present in the form of the sun in Diyuloka, the abode of the sun. I suppose you would say in the Puranas, Devaloka. In the form of non-violent fire in the earth, and the form of wind blowing everywhere in space. All living beings pertaining to these three worlds consider him a deity in their deeds. All the stars and planets twinkling in the abode of the sun are the varied forms of Lord Indra, viz., Lord Indra is the sole convener of the illuminating and breathing powers in all these three worlds." Unquote. Vedic sacrifices to Lord Indra. The horse sacrifice. Lord Indra is a frequenter of sacrifice and was invoked through a wide variety of Vedic rites and sacrifices. Given his status, this is to be expected. There are too many to fully document in this basic study. Besides the Soma and animal sacrifices, Lord Indra was also worshipped with sacred hymns. One of his roles is also guardian of the sacred rites. One of the most prominent rites in which he is involved is, of course, the horse sacrifice. In this rite, the sacred horse's strength and vitality is identified with Lord Indra, but specifically several parts of the sanctified horse's body were dedicated to him. These were the shoulders as well as the third and 11th ribs. The thighs were offered to Lord Indra and Lord Brihaspati jointly. In the rite of the horse sacrifice, there were other animals which were offered to Lord Indra, earlier in the rite. One of these was a goat, which was to be tall and sturdy, and for Indra and Agni jointly, a black-necked goat and white-flanked goat, as well as one which was dappled. He was also offered a sterile cow, quote, for Indra, the good worker, a cow who slips her calf, unquote. In the Rig Veda, bulls are mentioned as sacrifices to Lord Indra, as well as a wild ass. In the Atharva Veda, that sacrifice of oxen is also mentioned, especially the head. In the very few paths in modern India that controversially still continue the practice of animal sacrifice, I believe all of these two fierce aspects of the goddess, it is usually the head and blood which is offered. The Soma sacrifice. Perhaps the most important regular ritual associated with Lord Indra is the Soma sacrifice. He is called the Lord of Soma and bears the additional epitaph of Somapati, or the guardian of Soma. No deva is more associated with the Soma than Lord Indra. It is said Soma exudes for Indra. While Lord Indra does not receive the first portion, which goes to Lord Vayu, he does receive the largest. When he quaffs the Soma, it is said his belly swells like an ocean, and his acceleration is such that heaven and earth cannot contain Indra on Soma. Quote, voracious Indra has taken up as ardently as a horse approaches a mare to partake of the copious libation contained in the sacrificial ladles. Having stayed his well-horsed golden and splendid chariot, he plies himself, capable of heroic actions, with the beverage, unquote. The brew augments his power. It is the Soma that is often attributed with inspiring Lord Indra's heroic deeds. Among the most frequently mentioned is that Indra drinks Soma to repel foes and conquers all worlds by the power of Soma. One of the descriptions the seers give, which is somewhat controversial, is that Indra is more generous when drunk, and he gives things away. Aurobindo found this literal interpretations of these verses not only objectionable, but he mocks them in Secret of the Vedas. As an aesthetic, that is certainly understandable. More rambunctious behavior by Lord Indra is the reference to a legend where he stole the Soma of the other devas. Quote, in the dwelling of Tivashta, Indra drank the costly Soma from the vessels of the offerers, unquote. On this verse, Sayana notes that Lord Indra came to Lord Vishwakarma's abode uninvited and by force drank the Soma prepared for the other devas. I would certainly not deny the possibility that there are esoteric components concealed in these verses. It should be pointed out that the Soma brew is not alcohol, and it does not make one drunk in the normal sense of the verse. That already would raise questions regarding the meanings of these verses. These are the sort of things that are flags. Transformation of Lord Indra through the Vedas. These verses could also be seen as representing the behavior of chieftains in tribal societies, objectionable as they may be to us at this particular point. It is possible that this was projected onto Lord Indra on the assumption that this is how one in his position behaves in earlier legends that were simply passed along. There are a variety of possibilities as to what these verses may mean. He seems certainly to that he might be at home, at least if that's accurate how they're portrayed, in Valhalla with Odin, or feasting in the long halls of some ancient Irish chief. It is interesting to note the change, however, in the imagery associated with this rustic king of the 5 tribes to that which is found in the later Vedas. There are changes. This is best exemplified by the addition of royal paraphernalia to the iconography of Lord Indra in the later works. Quote, "O Lord Indra, you have a great crown on your head," unquote. This is nowhere in the there is nowhere in the Rig Veda where Lord Indra is portrayed with a royal crown or seated upon a throne as the kings are seated on the throne. We request you please be seated on the seat made of kusa grass. However, in the later Atharva Veda, both are found. Thus, the shift of imagery from that of a tribal chieftain, or at least a rustic, to an urban king appears to be present. This would seem to represent the changes taking place in the ruling elite as the caste system began to form. As roles became more defined and the trappings of authority became more defined as well, Lord Indra began to be portrayed with the imagery of more classical kings. So this concludes part 1 of this study of Lord Indra, and I thank you for your attention.